I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex, and I am delighted to be here with the two women who are the masterminds behind a major summit coming to Washington, D.C. during the World Bank and IMF spring meetings. It's the Global Inclusive Growth Summit. And for those of you who are not yet aware of it, this is a summit that's been around a couple of years, but it is being reborn at a much larger scale. And as you'll hear in a minute, given the people who are attending, the speakers, and the issues, it's set to make a major mark in Washington, D.C. in the week of the World Bank and IMF spring meetings. This is something people are buzzing about, and I want to get a little bit more insight into why and what the backstory is. So Shamina Singh is with me, Ida Rademacher is with me, and these two women have been pushing this agenda forward on inclusive growth. This is the Global Inclusive Growth Summit. Shamina, let me start with you. This event has happened before. There was a pre-pandemic version, there was a virtual version during the pandemic, but now it seems like you and Ida are taking this summit to another level during this year's World Bank IMF spring meetings. I've heard people refer to it as the private sector spring meetings. Give us the backstory. What is the Global Inclusive Growth Summit? What's it all about? Why are you taking it to this new, larger summit level?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us here. It's an exciting time to be doing this work. I think there's a sense of urgency around doing the work, and I think that's the answer to your question, which is it's time that we ensure that the best of the private, the best of the public, the best of the social sector come together in true partnership to really address the major issues that we're all facing. And so I think really the time is now and the time is right and the people are ready.
We're going to get into some of the big names that are coming to this, but maybe Ida, just starting with you on the partnership. Right, Shamina referred to the importance of this multi-sectoral partnership. How did this partnership happen?
Yeah, well, it was great timing, and it's both a personal story and an institutional story, which I think is how real change happens in the world. It's the moment when we first started talking about this. It was we didn't know it was pre-COVID,
right.
But of course it was. Aspen is an interesting profile. It's as much about calling leaders to action, no matter what institutions they're in, as it is really looking at a specific set of issues that are challenges facing society. And Aspen's all about a free, just, and equitable society.
The Aspen Institute was founded by private sector leaders to really address a lot of the issues that we're facing today. The program that I participated in with the Aspen Institute, the Henry Crown Fellowship, is a values-based leadership program. And so that affiliation and those connections I think really helped inform the way that we have been working at looking at these issues at Mastercard. And so for many years, over a decade, we've at Mastercard been looking at issues around financial inclusion, inclusive growth, sustainability, and the like. And I think partly because Ida and I were friends, I'd been an admirer for her work for many years. It was a conversation around how do we bring the best of Aspen together with the best of Mastercard. This belief in complementary assets being required to really solve the problems of today. And then it also gave us a reason to work together, because I think we've been operating in complementary circles for many years, and we just decided that it was time to see what we could do together.
So we're getting a feeling already, I think, that this summit is a bit different than the World Bank IMF spring meetings that it's happening alongside. It's got more of the private sector, civil society flavor to it. What are some of the specific themes or even the people who are going to be there that we should know about?
I think the World Bank meetings are so important, and it's a lot of the finance ministers and major serious commitments and conversations happening there. I think at the same time, just down the way, you're going to be having topical conversations among people who you may not necessarily know, but you certainly should be partnering with. So I think the tone of the conversations that we'll be seeing at the summit will be really around solutions. The idea of really moving from silos, so getting out of our public sector hat, our private sector hat, our social sector hat, and really saying it's actually time to break out of the silos and really move towards solutions. And I think the people that are coming that we've been able to attract really speak to that. So everybody from, Trevor Noah to Hamdi Ulukaya from Chobani to Hans Vestberg from Verizon, of course, to our CEO, Michael Miebach, from Mastercard all the way through to multilateral development leads, all the way through to social sector leaders, and everybody in between is sort of, I think, what's really exciting about it for me. But I don't know, Ida, in terms of how you're thinking about participants and the flow.
I think the blend this year in particular between international and domestic and industrialized countries and developing countries, we've talked for a long time about the great convergence around some of the issues that we're facing and the ways that technology and dialogue, both, right, are these major tools that are going to have to be brought to the fore. So I think the food insecurity issues that we'll touch upon, the way that climate comes up, one of the ways that we've looked at the arc of these inclusive growth summits is that, we've been talking about the 3 C's really. There's been COVID, there's climate, and there's conflict, all of which are in such sharp relief to how households and broad national economies have to deal with financial shocks these days. And so the idea that we could have a very pragmatic conversation among leaders that are tackling these issues in different ways across the country together in real time with the spring meetings is really exciting.
And Ida, you literally wrote the book on wealth inequality, and you're going to be leading a panel at this session all about that issue. How do you close the racial wealth gap? How do you use financial inclusion to do it? Tell us a little bit about that session and what people can expect.
Yeah, I think Shamina said it earlier. I think the Aspen Institute was founded to look at the critical issues facing society. And I think you'd be hard-pressed in this era to look at the two issues that we really have to confront. They are climate change and inequality. The ways that those two, they pose different kinds of systemic risk. But they both are things that we have to take seriously. And when you think about the inequality angle to that, the more you talk about inclusive growth and shared prosperity, at the end of the day, if it doesn't show up on a household balance sheet, you didn't follow the through line to figure out how you're really going to make it matter in people's lives. And that leads to stronger economies, it leads to stronger democracies. And so the conversation about the future of wealth is really how you get granular about the conversation about inclusive growth. And that's what we're bringing to the point. It's the North Star. It's the equivalent. How do we bring out the equivalent of a net zero conversation to inequality? And I think it's going to be about the future of wealth.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea, net zero conversation around inequality. Shamina, what about some of the other key themes? Like climate, Ida brought up, is going to be a big part of the summit. Why is it, and what do you expect to come out that might be different than what you would hear in a more official convening?
Well, I think the point that you raised earlier about this being the third in a series is interesting because I don't know if you remember, but at our last summit, our first panel was about the intersection of environmental and financial inclusion. And so several years ago, we raised the topic of saying you cannot have a conversation about sustainability if you don't have a conversation about inclusive growth. And so we called that out 2 years ago. And I think this time, what we're seeing is really about bringing these intersectional issues together. And so I think some of the panels that, I think about that are, related to, obviously, to the intersection of financial inclusion and sustainable growth. But the partnership piece, I think we have to move, and I think what this conference is intending to do is move us from sort of transactional engagement to transformational partnerships. And that's what I'm really looking forward to, is that for every conversation that we have, there is something not only that is interesting and somebody can take it away and do something with it, but it's actually focused on the partnership and the engagement between. Look, I think it's going to be really interesting to hear Brad Smith talking about technology and inclusive technology. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear Mukhtar Diop in conversation with Michael Miebach talking about inclusive innovation and how we should be thinking about really complex issues in a solution-oriented way. I think it's going to be fascinating to hear about the data conversations, the conversations around food security, the conversations around financial security, but to hear it from everybody from the grassroots, like Shamina Singh, who's coming all the way from India for the conference, all the way to people in Washington, D.C., the power of place, and how the power of place from Washington, D.C. to grassroots in India, we all share a very similar very similar predicament, but also can share very similar solutions.
Can we talk a little bit more about this idea of place? Because I know that in summits like this, and there's a lot of big corporate CEOs, you think immediately about scale. And huge corporations like a Mastercard, you think about how many millions of people you can reach, even billions of people. But this summit seems to be taking a slightly different lens on these issues and saying, it also matters to think about where you are and what the unique needs are. Why is that, and what is the kind of unique take you're bringing on this idea of place?
At the end of the day, for change to happen, for people's actual lives and well-being to be better because of the expanding ways that markets are trying to serve, and we're trying to correct for market failures in certain places, it matters that you get really granular about what's going on in people's everyday lives, and that means that we want to honor place. And so the many ways that I know Aspen honors, we will not only honor the greater Washington area by having some of the greater Washington Partnership partners there, and but we will also think about the ancestral tribal, area that we live in the DC area there, and everybody is coming from someplace, and we're making room, not just in the public summit, but in the full conversations that are happening around it, for people to stop and be quite mindful about the way that solutions that are going to hit the last mile actually need to have those zip codes in mind.
And I want to talk about the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth for a second, because you've been in the news a lot just very recently, and in fact, I think a lot of attention on this summit is coming because the person that you founded the center with is Ajay Banga, who was, of course, was the CEO of the Mastercard company and now is the U.S. nominee for World Bank president. And then just shortly after that announcement was made, Mike Froman, who is a vice chairman at the company, had announced he's leaving to become the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. So people are asking a lot about what is this Center for Inclusive Growth at Mastercard? What's in the water over there?
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit more about the center and where it fits into the kind of broader ecosystem on these issues and beyond.
Sure. So the center was really created to provide a new model for how private sector companies can participate in social and environmental impact. The idea was, how do we take the assets of Mastercard in this case, but really the assets of the private sector, and turn them towards social and environmental impact? And that's been the model that we've created at the center, not only through partnerships like with the Aspen Institute, but also with programmatic investments, research, and partnerships with universities, and also doing these things like convenings and working with partners like Devex to make sure that the work doesn't happen in a silo, the work doesn't stay inside a center, but that the work is dependent on partnerships and a network model of implementation.
So let's just talk about the event itself. Who's coming? If somebody's watching this, they're interested in attending. How does it actually work? Ida, can you give us a sense of who do you expect to be there? What's it going to be like?
Well, I mean, audience-wise, I'm excited that there are people coming from, again, all over the world to be there. Some people are going to be coming over from the World Bank meetings. You'll have a highly influential set of leaders, but more importantly, you have a set of leaders who are going to be impatient to sit and not do. And so I think that there's going to be partnerships that are profiled, but there's also going to be partnerships that are formed because of how people find each other in the room, how we are making room both in during the conversation, but also what happens around it for engagement. And that's certainly going to be the case if you're not in Washington, that there'll be an opportunity to watch online, engage online. And as with all things, it's a little bit of a tip of the iceberg. There's a lot to the partnership and the broader Partnership for an Inclusive Economy across Aspen that's happening year-round through fellows, through programs. And so what we're hoping is both to be able to showcase some of the ways that this partnership has really created entirely new, transformational programmatic work, but it's also seeding other things. And I think that's what we're going to see that day is some new announcements, some exciting new Spark grants being announced, something that's going to pique your interest about what more can I do as a leader.
It's an incredible sort of A to Z of people who are on the ground doing a lot of the frontline work, global leaders. It's an amazing group, and it's a rare opportunity to have all of those people represented in one space talking about how to move things forward. And of course, Devex is a media partner. We will be there covering all of this. There will be tremendous interest among the global development community for everything that comes out of this session. So we're delighted and thrilled and can't wait to see you all in Washington, D.C. on April 13th.
Thanks, Rod. Really excited.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you in person or online on April 13th for the Global Inclusive Growth Summit. Look in the description for the links for how to register. We look forward to seeing you there.